Hello, fellow literati. Welcome to In the Dark, the internet's most original literature show. As promised in the last episode, which was about influence and originality in literature, if you didn't get a chance to check it out because it'll help you understand this episode a little bit. So in that episode, I ended it off by saying, whoops, I ran out of time, because I wanted to talk about plagiarism, but not specifically plagiarism, but a kind of writing that's inherently, it's based on plagiarism. And I'll get more into depth in just a second. My name's Nikita. Did I say that already? Hello. Welcome to In the Dark, the internet's My Name's Nikita literature show. I always forget who I am. Forget to mention it. The identity is such a funny thing, isn't it, guys? Oh yeah, and my co-host, Squeaky Chair, has been in a lot of episodes, yet silent, fortunately. Anyway, so before I wanted to get into the meat of the problem here, I just wanted to ask whether or not you prefer longer videos. I cut off last video because it was already 20 minutes long. Squeaky. I cut off yesterday's video at 20 minutes long, which I think is already maybe a little bit too long. But please let me know in the comments. I would really, really appreciate it. It would help me make this in a way that is more convenient for people to watch, more engaging. I do find personally, when I start talking, the first little bit is the hardest. So I'm not necessarily against making like a 30-minute video. Kind of like that how to read poems, how to read poetry video I made, which was like 30 minutes, I think. It's still a bit early. I only have a couple people watching, so it takes very long for the analytics to even come in. So I'm not sure exactly when people are dropping off. But please let me know. Do you prefer like a 10 minutes and 1 second video? Do you prefer 30 minutes? I think I probably wouldn't go much longer than 30 minutes, with some exceptions. But I'd love to know. Anyway, that's enough time wasted. We wasted probably a lot of time. Ooh. So yeah, I was going to talk about found poetry. That's what I had in mind. Because that little, that side of the spectrum that is really just, it's not even derivative. It's basically plagiarism. It's kind of an interesting terrain, because for quite some time now, you've had found poetry, found text writing, things like this, which ostensibly started with Dada again. You hear Dada coming up a lot because I really, I didn't make it up. Dada is actually very influential in a lot of ways. But so the Dadaists, it's so fun to say. It's also because every other movement ends in ist, and there are a lot of people that would say Dadaist. I just feel like it's kind of counterintuitive for the movement. So Dada, as I mentioned in my 3-minute literature video on Dada, one of their really famous techniques was the cut-up poem from Tristan Tzara's Dada Manifesto of, I forget the year. But basically the idea was you had a newspaper, so you take a newspaper article or something like this, you cut up each word into an individual piece, and then you throw all that in a bag, shuffle it up, and then pull it out and whatever order it's in, you just keep it in that order, and that's a poem. So obviously, when that was made, the kind of it was a criticism to an extent, and also a statement in its own way, of illogic and things like that. So it's like, I'll take your logical newspaper, because newspapers are very logical, very goal-oriented. Like, it's just kind of very, it's information-based, it's logical, results-oriented. Like, it's just a transmission thing for information. It's not really about the experience of reading the newspaper. It's not really about pleasure specifically. It's mostly about just information. Anyway, so you just destroy that and you turn it into a cool poem, or not cool, but you turn it into nonsense basically, and then the nonsense is a poem. And then it's like a double criticism, because your silly nonsense poem, according to Tzara, is basically on par with classic literature, or at least the literature of his day. So that is already, that's considered kind of like the grandfather of found poetry, because the words you don't make, they're from somewhere. I mean, it's not quite found poetry, in the sense that you're performing like a transformative act. In this case, that's pretty radical. Like, it's not, the article you find isn't even particularly important, and also the result will not really resemble it. It's like a very original piece, interestingly enough. And then Tzara would say, oh, it's like, it's attributable to you because you made it technically, but it's not your words, right? So you didn't really make it. You know, it kind of opens up a lot of interesting avenues for thought, I guess. But then you have more intense found poetry. Like, you have, I suggest looking it up. There's a lot of different examples, but it's essentially, in the 60s and 70s and kind of onward, you had writers and poets that progressively took more and more, and kept what they took in more and more of an in like a original format. So you have poems that are like transcripts of speeches, just with added line breaks to make it poetic. You have lines taken from Wikipedia articles, from chat rooms, things like this, and just not changed at all, but they're taken out of the context, and the new context gives it kind of a new perspective. In a sense, it's kind of like Duchamp's Urinal, where it's what makes it art is that it's taken out of context and you're looking at it with an artistic lens, if that makes sense. And without getting into into a whole lot of arguments about how stupid or brilliant the whole urinal thing is, I think that's a completely different conversation. But it's kind of like that, because if you take some post, excuse my language, from the internet, you know, in its natural habitat, it's just it's nothing special. It's, you know, you see a million of them every day, or like some innocuous tweet, waiting in line to buy cereal, right? Or you know, you have some tweet that's like they ran out of Kellogg's or something, right? Whatever. In the normal context, it doesn't mean anything. But by taking it out of context and either just looking at it differently or mixing it with other things, it becomes new. And so that style of poetry is kind of interesting, because it toes the line between. It's weird. So I guess my spectrum theory, like the spectrum example I used to describe it, doesn't really work very well in this case, because found poetry is usually it's both plagiarism and not really avant-garde anymore, but new at least, right? So it's kind of like clever. Even like there's found poetry still being made that has kind of fresh twists. Voyager would be one example of that. If you can find the book, let me see who it's by actually. Voyager book. No, is it not called Voyager? Voyager by, oh man, I don't think I'll be able to to pronounce this. Srikanth Reddy. Anyway, I'll link it in the description. But this is a good book that I believe is all found text. But I'll leave you some info, and I'll leave a couple links. A couple other good books that are like that are, excuse me, Blood and Guts in High School by, I'll leave it in the description. I don't want to waste your time. But Blood and Guts in High School like has whole passages from, I forget which book, but just whole passages ripped out, like direct plagiarism. But even in that sense, like because it's in the book, and it's kind of in the middle of the book, the context gives you a new way of looking at it, which would be one way to defend it. But it's an interesting discussion of, is that still plagiarism? Like it might have been Shakespeare, I'm not sure. Ooh. But yeah, so found text. It's actually quite fun to play around with. I have a found text poem as well on my Instagram. If you want to take a look, it's kind of like, if you scroll down a little bit past the most recent ones, it's one of the three without an image. There will be one row of three without an image that are all pretty long. It's the one called 10 Methods of Extraction. And basically that poem is just 10 lines from different sources online, all around the theme of extraction. But it's very cool because in their context, those sentences are innocuous. But if you take them out of the context like I did, and if you put them together or into a new context, they kind of open up and become poetic and interesting. Excuse me. Oh, I don't know what that's about. But yeah, my throat is acting up. I believe that's all I really had to say about it. It's just kind of interesting. So it's weird, yeah. I guess I mentioned this a little bit in the last video, but it's like if you get too far to the extreme of incomprehensibility, it kind of becomes boring. And then if you get too far into plagiarism, it also, I guess, would kind of become boring. Because at this point, just if you don't make any sense, it's conceptual. Or kind of with current where critical theory is now at, something that doesn't make sense will be kind of understood as being subjective, or basically like open to interpretation. And just with the way language works, and even if you go as far as not using language, the way symbols work, because language is symbolic. If that's interesting too, you should check out semiotics. It's kind of the study of signs and symbols. Very interesting. It's like a postmodern, maybe a little bit before postmodern, but it's around that time period kind of thing. It's very cool. But yeah, so the word chair is a sign. Like it's not a literal chair, right? And at the same time, like, a picture of a chair is also not a chair. So, like, pictures are kind of language as well. And you have, like, hieroglyphs, which are, you know, picture language, basically. But even if you were to say, like, I believe in my last video I said, oh, if you take a chair and you say this chair is a poem, like, now there's a conceptual way to understand that. But it's probably already been done, which is the thing, right? So, yeah, with incomprehensibility, it kind of, that far extreme goes back to status quo, I guess. And then also, if you go too far, it's a plagiarism, and like, you're so unoriginal that you literally just copy something. That also is kind of like, okay. So there's really no more extremes. What a time to be alive. Wow. I love literature. And I'm sure there's exceptions to that. Like, it'd be interesting to see. You can be avant-garde by taking Macbeth and just taking the whole Macbeth and reprinting it with your own name and see what happens. I'm sure that's been done, though. But if it's not, hey, you can have that idea, courtesy of me. Same with the chair thing. Please, if you look into it and it hasn't been done and you do it, you can send me a message, and I will be very impressed. I will send you a kiss, an e-kiss. Okay. So yeah, please, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, please let me know what kind of length is most convenient, is most enjoyable for you. It seems that, you know, around 15-20 minutes is how most of these are turning out, but if you say shorter is better, I can definitely, like, keep track of it, or try to just cover less ideas. It's just when I start talking about one thing, I get ideas about something else. And hopefully that's interesting. You can also let me know if I should ramble less. Kind of the idea here was that we would just hang out in the dark, talk about literature. But I'm open to feedback. I'm open to changing the format. If this is a little bit boring or a little bit too long-winded, sure. All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us. In addition to the length of the video, if you have any ideas or suggestions, questions, topics for a future video, please let me know, and I will cover them as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Farewell.